Exciting developments. How lawmakers on Capitol Hill are trying to keep the government open and avoid default. White House reaction. President Joe Biden cancels a trip to Chicago to work on saving his economic agenda. Public grilling. Top military generals face more questions about the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. And new world leader. Japan paves the way for a new prime minister. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 29th, 2021. Well, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Democratic lawmakers are feverishly negotiating and helping to make progress on 4 major issues central to President Joe Biden's agenda. But there is infighting in the Democratic Party, pitting progressives and moderates on how to proceed as time is running out. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has more.
The clock is ticking for lawmakers as they try to prevent an economic disaster. They have 4 issues that they have to tackle, all with looming deadlines. First, they have to pass a continuing resolution to fund the government before it runs out of cash as soon as Friday. They must also raise the debt ceiling before the government reaches that threshold by the middle of October. They also have to strike a compromise on a $3.5 trillion reconciliation package and pass a $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is set for a vote on Thursday. The problem? Democrats have tied several of these items together and are now trying to separate them. As for the debt ceiling and funding the government, the Speaker says she has a plan.
So we have a number of things on the lift the debt ceiling, keep government open. We have to do those imminently.
That has Democratic progressives up in arms.
Our caucus is strongest when it's unified, and decoupling these bills, it starts to pit priorities against one another, and that's why I disagree with separating them.
As for the infrastructure bills, progressives continue to say they will vote against the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill without guarantees. Social agenda items like expanding Medicare, education, and climate change are in the $3.5 trillion bill.
All we're saying is come up with an agreement to implement the president's agenda, which 48 and probably 49 senators agree with, and all of the House can live with.
Progressives say part of the problem moderates like Senators Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema haven't said what they want. Republicans tell me the threat of inflation is looming and the price tag is too high.
We've spent $11 trillion over the last 18 months, and we're going to spend another $5 trillion. It's not what the American people want.
The first order of business is to pass a continuing resolution to fund the government till early December. The Senate is expected to take a vote on that issue tomorrow. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
President Joe Biden canceled his trip to Chicago today so he could stay in Washington and work on passage of his multi-trillion-dollar spending proposals. The big question now, can he garner the votes necessary, or will the numbers and dollars not add up? White House correspondent Owen Jensen continues our team coverage tonight. Owen.
Tracy, good evening to you. Tonight, President Joe Biden is banking on these massive spending measures to build back better while contending it won't break the bank.
As lawmakers haggle over the final numbers and dollar signs, it may be now or never for President Joe Biden's pursuit of a massive expansion of social programs, better known to supporters as his Build Back Better agenda. The president himself hunkering down in the White House, trying to maneuver his spending proposals across home plate.
I'm not negotiating from here. I could otherwise say this is in, this is out. We're not going to do that from here. We're obviously at a precarious and important time in these discussions.
The legislation so massive it's difficult to pin down what's in it. While the White House struggles to sell the public on the wide range of initiatives, including battling climate change, lowering education costs, and promoting access to child care that Build Back Better entails, major crises from the chaotic and deadly Afghanistan troop withdrawal, the thousands packed under a bridge at the southern border, to the coronavirus pandemic have consumed attention and hurt the administration's attempt to sell its economic agenda. Today, Vice President Kamala Harris meeting with small business executives trying to get them on board.
Vice President Harris tweeted the American people overwhelmingly support the Build Back Better agenda, but conservative Mercedes Schlapp, the former White House Director of Strategic Communication, calls, quote, inflation, economic failure, and reckless spending a Democrat recipe for disaster. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Today, the House heard testimony from President Biden's top defense officials on the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. 3 generals fielded questions regarding the steps they took to prepare for the withdrawal and why the execution went so poorly. And joining us now for more on this is John Elliott, Republican strategist and former National Security Council spokesman under President Trump. John, welcome back. Always great to see you.
Great to see you, Tracy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Great to have you. You know, a lot to get to, but first, I'm going to get your thoughts on the hearings and maybe what the big takeaway was for you.
So, Tracy, we had 2 days of hearings. That doesn't happen very often, but it showed there were 2 full days of hearings. And I used to work on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and there it was almost unheard of. You'd have a day-long hearing, but that shows how important this is, not only to the administration because they're taking a lot of heat for this, but it's also very important to the American people. If you look at the president's approval rating, really in the last, since this debacle that he's had in Afghanistan, his approval rating has really gone down 15 points nationally, and in some states like Iowa, it's gone down 20 points. So this is on a lot of people's minds, and that's why senators from both parties wanted to really grill the generals about that. So in terms of takeaways, what I would say is 2 things. Number one is the president was contradicted by his generals on the fact that they had recommended that there be an orderly exit and that we not pull down the number of troops from 2,500 to 0 before we had all of the Americans out of Afghanistan and our friends and partners who had visas who were also due to come out. So we weren't able to do that. And the president was asked on ABC by George Stephanopoulos whether or not he had that recommendation from his generals, and he flat out denied it. And they were under oath in both the Senate and the House today, and they said that's actually not true, that they argued directly. They said it as diplomatically as they could, but they said we actually gave him, they contradicted him and said we gave him the advice not to draw down the troops until we have all of our people out. That was number one. Number two, the other contradiction was that President Biden last week told the United Nations that the war in Afghanistan is over, and General Milley, both generals were asked about that, and they both said that this is actually not over, that we're going to be looking for over-the-horizon capability there. And so we can't do an end zone dance the way that the president wants to do in terms of us getting out of there, particularly not in the way that we got out of there, where 13 Americans were killed and we had 10 innocents that were killed who were attacked with a drone strike. So it's very troubling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the things that struck me, too. All the generals basically said we are at an increased risk for terrorism here now in the homeland because of what was going on in Afghanistan. Talk to us about that.
That's exactly right. So we've always had a threat from the only reason we were in Afghanistan, we ended up staying there for 20 years, which is something that President Trump campaigned against back in 2016, said he was going to get us out of there because no more endless wars is what he said. And the American people have really, it was almost an 80-20 issue in terms of wanting us to get out of there. But if you look at the sole reason we were supposedly going over there was to get bin Laden and to break up Al-Qaeda and what later became ISIS in Afghanistan, but to really end terrorism, terrorists using Afghanistan as a home base, if you will, and they absolutely did that before 9/11. And so we were going to go over and only be there as long as we needed. But then we got into this whole idea of nation building, and nation building doesn't serve us. It's not what the American people are looking for. I mean, there are a number of countries around the world that we can go to nation build if that's our job, but we don't want to spend taxpayer dollars. But we spent literally trillions of dollars over 20 years there. And so right now it's just a matter of the terrorist issue was solved. That's the only reason we were over there. But the generals said that hasn't even been solved now, that there are more terrorists more ISIS, Al-Qaeda's coming back. And so this is something that we really need to keep an eye on. But we lost our focus there. And if we had just been going after the terrorists, we probably could have dealt with that a lot better than we did over the last 20 years.
Yeah, there were a lot of questions. One thing that I also noticed, a couple of questions to General Milley about that conversation that he had with the Chinese general. Let's quickly talk about that.
Okay, very quickly, Tracy. I'm glad you brought that up because that was another big headline that came from the hearing. So General Milley, he did two things according to the Bob Woodward book. Number one, he talked to Bob Woodward. He talked to a couple of other, Mike Bender, the Wall Street Journal, wrote a book, as well as Carol Leonnig of the Washington Post. He talked to all three of them for their book. And the president just tweeted last night, said, look, why is it that General Milley is talking to these reporters instead of doing his job and preparing to get us out in Afghanistan? And really, we probably would not have had such a botched exit if he had been not focused on burnishing his political credentials through these books. So that's another reason why Marsha Blackburn, Josh Hawley, two senators, have called on him to resign for that. But really quickly, in terms of the Chinese segment, is that China, General Milley admitted that he talked to China both before the election and then right around January to basically tell them, hey, I'm going to give you personal heads up if we're ever going to be attacking you. That's not his job to be talking and contradicting the president. The president was never going to go to war with China, but there's nobody authorized him to go ahead and take that action and decide to call up his counterpart, the general over in China, and then he had to deny that. So it's a real mess for General Milley, and that's why it's both the China issue as well as the other issue about talking to those writers as a member of the military instead of focusing on his job that have him in the hot seat right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have to wrap up, but I got to tell you, it seems like we have more questions really than answers from these hearings. So I guess we'll have to see what shakes out.
We'll have to stay tuned. And once again, the president is going down in the polls. And so this is something that, to your point, we're going to be revisiting here over the next few weeks, certainly.
Absolutely, John. Thank you so much for your time. Always appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate it.
Well, San Francisco's Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone is calling on all Catholics to pray and fast for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Archbishop Cordileone observes that congressional reaction, including from Speaker Pelosi against the Texas heartbeat law, reflects a need for conversion of heart, quote, to steer us away from the path to death and reclaim a culture of life. Citing unconstitutional vagueness, a federal judge has blocked two enforcement provisions in Arizona's pro-life law, which prohibited selective abortions due to genetic abnormalities. However, the judge's ruling is allowing a personhood provision in the law to remain. Chile's lower house of Congress wants to decriminalize most first trimester abortions. A bill would require approval by both chambers. Chile's Minister of Women's Affairs says no woman in Chile is serving jail time under the current law and is vowing to protect life. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party has a new leader with the election of Fumio Kishida.
自民党改革に対する思い
Vowing Kishida's victory makes him Japan's presumptive prime minister. The outgoing prime minister resigned earlier this month to address Olympic-related coronavirus infection rates. Kishida had previously served as Japan's foreign minister. Coming up, from vaccine mandates to booster shots, how the response to the coronavirus crisis continues to shake the country. With vaccine mandates on the rise across the U.S., many are refusing to comply, including some healthcare workers. Many healthcare employees in states such as North Carolina and New York who have not been vaccinated have either been suspended or fired. Meanwhile, in California, Governor Gavin Newsom has said a mandate for all students 12 and older is, quote, on the table. Joining us now is Washington Examiner senior columnist and American Enterprise senior fellow Tim Carney. Tim, welcome back. Great to see you. Let's talk more about these vaccine mandates, which really seem to be getting a lot of pushback for one reason or another. And, you know, while it's understandable from a public health perspective to want to see people vaccinated, firing them for not being vaccinated sort of seems to be opening up a Pandora's box. I want to get your thoughts on this, and how do you see this all playing out?
I think the two examples you gave earlier were sort of perfect opposite ends of the spectrum. Healthcare workers have long had to get vaccines that weren't mandatory for other people. The hospital closest to my house did require the flu vaccine for its nurses who were going to be working with any patients. And so in that regard, you can understand in a healthcare setting saying, if your job is dealing with patients, you have to get a vaccination. Students who are 12 to 18 is a totally different world. Here we have, there's just not a lot of the data showing that the vaccine was effective for them, had trouble gathering enough data because there just weren't that many bad infections in the first place for 12-year-olds. So it's not as urgent for those. And then there's more worry about cases that's not established, of myocarditis, other sort of side effects of the vaccine being worse for younger people. So that seems to me governors who are lumping everybody together and requiring a vaccine for anyone who's eligible, that's sort of politics getting way ahead of the science.
Yeah, and there's been really an uptick in religious exemption requests. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. How difficult is it to get one of those exemptions?
Well, some places just sort of require you to state it or to swear and to sign your name to it, and that works for a sort of a small school or a small employer. I know I would never sign and swear that I had some deep held religious belief that I didn't have. For a Catholic, that would be apostasy, right? To swear you believe something that you didn't believe. But some places are requiring you to jump through more hoops and that sort of thing, and so that's part of the frustration. You don't want to have some overarching national rule, but people are seeing it in vastly different ways, and it adds to the confusion that in the Catholic teaching, there are some theologians and bioethicists who argue that the pro-life objection makes it either immoral to take the vaccine or acceptable not to. Meanwhile, the Pope, a lot of leading bioethics who have convinced me have argued actually this is an acceptable, very remote material cooperation in evil. So that division within the church doesn't clear up the confusion for a lot of employers who would say, wait, if the Pope okayed it, why aren't you okay with it?
Yeah, and definitely this is a hot button issue for sure. And at last night's gubernatorial debate in Virginia, Democratic candidate and former governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, has made mandates really a central part of his campaign, while his opponent, Republican Glenn Youngkin, is against the vaccine mandates. How big of a factor do you think that is in the race? And what do you think this says about the mood among voters across the country?
I mean, that you use the word hot button. There's so much division. Youngkin notably says he favors the vaccine. He thinks people should get it. He does not think the state government should be in the business of forcing people to get it or forcing employers to force their workers to get it. And that sort of taps into a view that, a lot of people who are rejecting the vaccine are saying, I just don't like the government telling me what to do. How that's going to play in Virginia's electorate is tricky because you do have a huge span of demographics, of education levels, of politics, of religious views. Virginia is actually incredibly diverse, and so I'm not going to be in a position of predicting how that will play.
Well, Tim, always great to speak with you. We appreciate your time. Tim Carney, Washington Examiner senior columnist and American Enterprise senior fellow. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Up next, being a good steward, how the University of Notre Dame is trying to help the Catholic Church manage its properties around the world. And encounter with Christ. Pope Francis reflects on St. Paul and how his transformation can inspire us all. A priest has resigned as chaplain of a Catholic high school in northeastern Indiana following sexual abuse allegations which have deemed credible. Father David Hunick has also been suspended from all public priestly ministry by the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend while protocols are being followed. Well, there's a change in church leadership for the Diocese of Brooklyn. Pope Francis has accepted the age-mandated resignation of Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio. As successor, Pope Francis has appointed Bishop Robert Brennan from the Diocese of Columbus, whose personal history and priestly ministry are rooted in Metro New York City. Pope Francis says asking for grace from Christ will lead us to lives of justice.
Sì, ma noi dobbiamo attuarla col nostro operato.
At his weekly talk to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father reflected on the doctrine of justification, once a point of contention in the Protestant Reformation, saying the love of Christ saved all of us. Pope Francis also reflected on St. Paul and how his life changed after meeting the risen Christ on the road to Damascus. The Catholic Church is the largest non-governmental landowner in the world, and a new initiative is helping faith-based organizations manage their properties. The Church Property Initiative, led by the University of Notre Dame, is studying the challenges and opportunities the Church faces with its properties. The aim is to assist the Church and other religious organizations in using their property and resources effectively. Joining us now from Rome is David Murphy, Program Director of the Church Properties Initiative. David, great to see you. Thanks so much for your time today. First off, how and why did this program begin?
Yeah, it's great to be with you. And this program got off the ground in its origin about 2 years ago when Notre Dame founded the Fitzgerald Institute for Real Estate, or FIRE. And we like to say that we're on fire with the Holy Spirit. We really want to be a world-class leader in real estate. So, of course, we have construction management, finance, architecture, law, all the underpinnings of real estate already at Notre Dame. But we wanted to be intentional about the church component. So how can we be of service to the church globally? And so we had a real estate vertical, and it took a while to materialize of what that would be. But about 2 months ago, I had the opportunity to come on board full-time with the team to kind of help crystallize that. And so we're looking at how to leverage and marshal best practices of real estate at the service of the church.
Yeah, and David, I'm wondering, what sort of challenges does owning property present to church officials?
Yeah, well, it should be no surprise to anyone watching that the church is the largest social service provider in the world. So we're the leading educator, healthcare provider, and living out the gospel that that'll require having property. So schools, cemeteries, parishes, and so to kind of live out our mission, we end up having a lot of real estate. But there can sometimes be a disconnect between the stakeholders who are managing that property, a nun, a religious brother, or a priest, and the realities of the challenges of the zoning, tax, financial issues that come along with owning and maintaining real estate. So there are some of the disconnects, I could say, between a priest who goes through seminary and gets a lot of theology or philosophy, but not a whole lot of finance or these real estate courses. So we're hoping to help serve the church in augmenting and supporting and walking with and alongside those stakeholders who are living out the mission's gospel every day.
And David, I understand in February there's going to be a conference in Rome on church real estate. What's the response been like so far? And also, what do you hope this conference accomplishes?
Yeah, well, one of the beautiful things about this job is I've gotten a front row seat of what the church has already done in a kind of entrepreneurial or innovative way across the world. Be it a adaptive reuse of a convent turned into a place for young adults to live and have community, or a school turned into workforce housing in Grand Rapids. The church is already alive and crackling with excitement in some of these areas, and we really hope that this conference raises those examples up so that other people can learn about the great work that the church is doing and learn from each other. We're a huge church across the world, and so what's going on in Philadelphia might not be known to what's going on in Peru or Ghana or all these other places where similar problems exist, but also similar opportunities exist to help meet the needs of today's issues through the new evangelization and through the real estate. And so the conference will be kind of gathering the church and different stakeholders, from leading sacred architects to civil engineers to top kin lawyers, who are all kind of operating and swimming in these waters. And we're hoping to kind of provide the convening authority for people to meet and encounter each other.
Well, it all sounds very exciting, and thank you for what you're doing. David Murphy, Program Director of Church Properties Initiative. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And on a much different note, the president of the Catholic University of America and his wife are celebrating the naming of their new puppy. With student input, John and Jean Garvey have named their 8-week-old golden retriever, Lola. Their previous furry companion, Gus, passed away in July and was really popular on campus. President Garvey says, quote, Lola was the overwhelming favorite name, and ours too, and she is a cutie. So adorable. Congratulations to them. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.